Well, let's kick off the webinar today. So the topic of today is basically SAP licensing models. So we'll be looking at what different licensing models we have. So we'll learn certain new things. We'll probably unlearn some of the things which we already know. So before we start with the webinar, let me quickly introduce myself. So my name is Raghu. I manage the SAP Security, GRC, and Audit, teams in ToggleNow. So ToggleNow is basically an organization with close to 10 years of experience in SAP Security, GRC, audits, fraud management, and all these areas. So I carry about 20 plus years of experience in these areas. So I work majorly in SAP Security, GRC implementations, and then giving a lot of designs in terms of how well they can utilize their or how well they can frame up their security landscapes. And automating GRC is one other major area that I'm working on. So we do a lot of automations in the GRC space. So I'm a CISA certified, and then I'm also a data privacy expert. Then I'm a certified fraud examiner. I recently completed my CFE, but I'm just waiting for the official confirmation on the completion. Otherwise, I'm done with all the 4 modules. And I'm also a certified security and GRC consultant. And then, in addition, I'm also an ITIL certified. Majorly involved in SAP licensing audits, and have got deep expertise in helping organizations in the licensing models. Right. So, may I request everyone to go on mute, please? Thank you. So, what we are basically discussing today is, little about the existing licensing models, which everyone knows about. And then we'll be moving on to the specifics on what additional licensing models that have come up, in the recent past, how exactly we need to look at these licensing models, how it is going to help the customers, maybe our customers, or in case if you are working for a client, what is that you can bring on to the table is what you basically will be able to understand. And this is the first webinar that we are doing in the SAP licensing. So we are planning to host few more webinars in the next couple of months, which basically helps you to understand how to read the contracts, how to optimize the licenses, how to analyze each of the license, and all these areas. Okay. So in case if you want to be updated with whatever the future webinars that we do, or the articles that we are going to publish down the line, I recommend you guys to go through the LinkedIn page, maybe follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or the YouTube. So we would be adding few videos as well in the Twitter, right? So please make a note of our social links, and then I request you to follow us so that you'll be updated with any of the latest happenings or the news that comes up with regards to the licensing. Okay. Now, so what is that we are discussing today is basically what is new in SAP licensing model before 2018 April. So everyone knows about what has happened, especially with the Diageo case in the indirect licensing model. Apart from that, we also know about few of the major licensing audits that have happened, and then wherein the customers have end up paying huge penalties to SAP. So there is a lot of chaos in that particular time, and SAP announced that they are going to come up with a new licensing model, which has been released in April 2018. And the new licensing model, relevant documents are available on the public domain. So you can just go to SAP and then download all the relevant documentation. And of course, we are going to discuss about some of those points as well in today's webinar, right? And apart from that, I'm also going to discuss in detail about the various licensing models. Then the S4HANA adoption, because a lot of customers today are moving on to S4HANA, even though SAP says that the ECC support is still available till 2027. Customers see a great need to move to S4HANA because of the various integrations or the various capabilities that SAP HANA is bringing on today. So that is exactly where we have to help our customers on what is the right approach to pick up the licenses, what kind of trade-in options are available, how well they can save money on the licenses is what you are going to understand in this session. So maybe we can discuss a couple of some of the questions that you guys have as well. So you'll understand how to get best of your licensing investments in S4HANA. And we also looks at various pros and cons and discuss about the indirect or the digital usage. So which is always a hot topic with many of the customers, right? So what we know about licensing models today, till today, is that we know that, okay, there are basically 4 different classifications, right? Called as human access, digital access, right? And then we have engine-based licensing models, and then we have custom models. Okay, so customizing the licensing models based on the customer requirements, right? So let's start with human access. What exactly is human access? So human access is also called as the named user license. Most of us are aware of the named user concept, like professional, limited professional, employee, shop floor user, right, logistic user, worker. There are 160 plus licensing categories available today under the named user licensing category, right? Which is a common good old categorization that we follow. So I'm sure 90% or 95% of the people know about what is human access or what is named user concept. Then we have the second classification called as digital access. Digital access is nothing but your indirect usage. So indirect usage is wherein, in case if your applications are talking to SAP, either reading data or writing data into the SAP system, then SAP basically classifies this usage as an indirect usage and basically bill you according to that particular usage. So earlier, the licensing model is entirely different. As I said, in April 2018, SAP has come up with the new indirect engine and mentioned that this is how exactly we are going to measure the indirect usage. So we'll probably have some deep dive on indirect usage, on what basically what kind of parameters SAP looks at the indirect usage, how we can quickly implement this indirect usage solution in the system and all those stuff, right? Then the third type of licensing model is called as the engine-based. Engine-based licensing model is wherein, okay, it is a specific engine wherein we see CRM, payroll related engines, and also the number of payrolls that that are generated in the system, or the number of contracts that have been applied in the system is what the system looks at, and then based on those engine calculations, SAP will charge you for that particular thing. And the fourth model is called as the custom model. So in the custom model, what happens is you can go to SAP and then say, hey, I have got these particular additional customizations that I want to implement in my system. So what is the existing licensing models might not work for me. So what is that model you can give, to ensure that, I arrange my licenses, in an appropriate way. So that is where SAP comes up with custom license models, and then they'll categorize your users into a specific licensing model. So this is, I'm pretty sure majority of us know about these four licensing models. But if you look at, there are certain additional models also, and especially with the S4 HANA, SAP has, SAP is bringing on various new models also into the contracts, right? So before S4 HANA, there is one commonly used model called as UDD, which is called as unlimited during deployment model. Okay, so this is something like a fair price to pay deal, wherein, okay, it's like, okay, when we go to any of the restaurant, you'll have hundreds of things, okay, but then you can choose what you want. There is no limitation that you have to take only this particular piece, right? So for most of the customers, especially for large organizations, okay, this is UDD model seems to be a very lucrative, and then they feel like, yeah, this is something which is good, we can probably take this particular contract and make our licenses unlimited. So what happens in the UDD model is customers doesn't need to classify, okay, uh, any of the users. So there is no professional user, there is no limited professional, there is no worker and all. So for a particular period of time, SAP says next 10 years you are in the UDD agreement, and from there probably we'll convert you into the regular name user concept. Okay, so what happens here is basically the agreement says that, okay, year on year there is a specific amount of growth that they will add. Let's say, for example, you have uh, 1000 licenses that you have procured under UDD. Now next year you have to agree that you are going to add another 100 or 200 licenses. So they basically tell you that, okay, you have to have 20% more every year for the next 10 years. But what happens after that specific period of time, once your UDD contract ends, you will be transitioned to a regular contract, and that is that is the time where you'll end up buying huge licenses. Okay, so this is one specific model where customers feel that they are paying very less amount and then getting unlimited licenses, but then in terms of a cost or a benefit model, UDD model is gonna cost more to the customers than having a well-defined contract from the day one. So what we basically recommend when we do the licensing audits to the clients is, even though the customers are on the UDD model, we suggest them to go with periodic reviews. So at least once in a year, they have to review before submitting their regular law report, and then basically evaluate what kind of usage they have today in the system. So this basically helps them to understand the real growth. Okay, what quantum of users are adding up, how many users belong to the top categories like developers or the professional users or the basis categories and all. So this is basically where they have to use the right SAM tools as well, software asset management tools as well. Okay, so this is pretty easy, right, for us to understand that, okay, there is named user concept, and then indirect usage concept, or the engine based, all these concepts, and then UDD model. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? What you don't know, or what we don't know, is huge, okay, which is the unknown part of it. So what we basically will do now is we understand what are the four new dimensions that SAP is looking at when it comes to the licensing models. Then we'll also understand the various licensing models, what all implementations are happening in the S4, and then what is the view-based model, which is something new in the market now. Even the new concept what SAP has introduced, the Rise with SAP, is completely under a view model. And then we also understand about the indirect usage. Okay. These are the 4 topics that I'm touching base, but then in case if you have any additional questions that you probably want to clarify, please use the chat option, leave your question, and in case if I have time at the end of the session, I'll address it. If not, I'll reply you guys individually with the solution, with the answer. Okay. Now, after 2018, what SAP did is, because if you look today, as per SAP data, okay, analysis, close to 5,800 customers have been moved into S4HANA. Okay, out of the total client base of close to 14,000 customers, roughly about 14,000 customers, around 5,000 users have been moved on to S4HANA. Now the focus is more on making more profits. So what happened, if you look at ECC, okay, or the previous models like licensing models, SAP is also closely moving from a perpetual model to a subscription model or a pay-per-use model. Okay. The same happens with any of the other provider. Now, if you look at Microsoft, for example, right? Earlier, we used to buy perpetual license of Windows or MS Office and all these products. Now that you have Office 365, wherein you are on a subscription model, year on year you have to pay. Or it can be like a simple antivirus software that we use today. It's not perpetual anymore. Okay, because the return on investment should not be one time for the customers. It should be an repetitive, earnings to the SAP or any of the provider. So with this, what SAP did is they have basically come up with 2 different modes. One is called as a digital core and the digital innovation. So what is digital core? Digital core is your SAP S4HANA and the basic applications that runs on the SAP digital core. And then the digital innovation is the new technologies like IoT based applications or machine learning, artificial intelligence, right? Or your SAP IRPA, all these comes under digital innovations. Your chatbot applications, right? Whatever SAP has introduced, CAI. So all these comes under digital innovation. So majority of these are based on cloud platform. Okay. So now going forward, the licensing models will fall into one of these modes. Either it falls under the digital core or it falls under the digital innovation. So if you look at the 4 dimensions of the S4HANA cloud licensing, is basically what SAP is now looking at is one part of that digital core licensing is called as the direct user access. So the named user concept has been tweaked into the direct core access, digital core, wherein you have 3 different models. Okay, it's called as self-service, core use, and the advanced use. So we'll have a deep dive into this. We'll understand what comes under self-service, what comes under core use, and what exactly is the advanced use. Okay, now if some customer is going for S4HANA, okay, the S4HANA licenses will be into these 3 buckets. Okay, either the user has to identify what self-service use they have, and then what is the core use and what is the advanced use, right? And the digital access, as I said, it is the indirect usage. So you have specific mechanisms to identify your digital access usage. So SAP has got its own tool available to identify, to measure the usage of your indirect usage of the third party applications that are reading or writing data to the SAP system. And then you have the solution add-ons, basically something called as IS utilities, for example, right? Any specific solutions, right? Cash management or a real spend. So there are special, special add-ons which are available, uh, which can be, uh, quickly implemented. So we have some term called as CC Flex, under which SAP is offering these core industry utilities based add-ons to the applications, which are completely on the cloud. And then the infrastructure services, wherein SAP even provides you specific tenant databases, or basically your hardware, everything will be provided by SAP. So going forward, the licensing model is not just the named user or the indirect usage. So it falls into one of these particular dimension, and then the calculation is also based on these dimensions. So if you look at the HANA deployment models, okay, uh, so the S4 HANA can be implemented either on-prem, or it can be on a private cloud or a public cloud. So what is the difference between these four deployment models? Right, before we understand how the licensing is measured, let's understand quickly what kind of deployments and what kind of agreements or the service levels that SAP gives us. Okay, so in case if a customer wants to implement S4 HANA on-prem, which is using their own data center or external data center, or hyperscalers like Amazon or Azure, or any of the now SAP has come up with their own hyperscaler, wherein you can even host your application on their data center. So when I say on-prem doesn't mean that the server or the data center should be within your own premise. It can be an external as well. But what is that you're getting with this is you have your own licenses. So we call it as BYOL, which is bring your own license. So this is where basically I want to host my own data center. I own my licenses, and then I manage my licenses completely, right? So for this, basically SAP uses a separate software contracts, like whatever the software contracts we have today. It is similar contracts that we basically use, and the service levels are also completely custom. It differs from customer to customer. Then we have the second model, which is called as HANA Enterprise Cloud, which is HEC. So this is where this is also considered as one of the on-prem, mostly managed by SAP, which is contracted as a subscription. So all you need to do is you just need to take, utilize their services, wherein the OS, DB, everything is managed by them, and you just pay for whatever the application and the database that you are using. So the metrics is basically whatever the usage is, how many gigs you are using, and then what is the core usage of your CPUs and all. So based on that, HEC will bill the customer, and then they have to pay. Okay, so the contract for this particular model is a little different from your complete on-prem deployment, and then the service level are also completely predefined. Then we have the HANA Private Cloud, which is a cloud edition, wherein the S4 HANA is deployed on a complete private infrastructure, and then SAP manages it. It includes licenses, subscription, everything, right? And the contract also includes the usage of your software. So it is not that you have to worry about what licenses you have today and all those things. So the contract will be continuously revisited by SAP, and then wherever it requires the contract to be changed based on the usage, you can change the contract. So similar way, you have something called as public cloud. Public cloud is basically a shared SAP infrastructure, wherein applications will be utilized on it's basically a multi-tenant. Basically users will have, let's say if I want S4 HANA, I'll be using same S4 HANA box with a different client number. So I might be logging into 100. There is another customer who logs into 200. Okay, there are lots of restrictions on this particular model. So if you actually look at what is that you have on the private cloud and the public cloud, this is what it is, right? So you have specific restrictions on the functional scope. So when you go on to the public cloud, what you have is business configurations are pretty standard. You cannot do any changes to your configurations. Then your line of business processes will be fixed. You cannot add more configurations. You cannot make a lot of changes. Client specific changes are only allowed, and a lot of restrictions when the way you would be using your HANA cloud application. But when you go for a single tenant, which is your own tenant, no one else would be sharing that particular system. That is where you'll have full functional changes. You can make certain changes to your line of businesses, industry processes and all, right? But if you actually go on a complete ERP on the cloud, then you can use the application as per your requirements. So you can make your customizations, modifications, whatever enhancements that you want to make, and all those things. So SAP has defined the use of your HANA cloud now. So either whether you want to go with on-prem or like a subscription model or a completely on a consumption model. So what happens now when you implement S4 HANA is you will fall into one of these three models. Either you can be in a perpetual model, which is mostly happens for the customers who are transitioning from existing ECC system or the existing ERP to S4 HANA or C4 HANA and all these applications. So what is the current model? 90% of the licensing contracts today are on one-time licensing fees with an annual recurring fee. So 22%, 25%, whatever SAP charges, they charge that particular annual recurring fee. Right. Now, SAP's vision by 2025 is to move the customers from a perpetual model to either on a subscription model or a consumption model. So what happens when customers move from a perpetual model to a subscription or a consumption model is basically customers need not worry about the maintenance fees because that is included in the subscription. So every year on year, so typically the licensing will be for 3 to 5 years. So there will be an annual subscription fee based on the estimated use and the support that these guys would need and what all cloud solutions that they are using. Okay, so there will be software use rights, databases are included, maintenance support is included, upgrades are included in this, hardware, everything is managed in the subscription model. And the consumption model is wherein there is no annual commitment. So it is payment based on the usage. Like if you look at your success factors today, or field glass application, Ariba, all these are pay-per use. So basically based on your usage, you have to pay SAP. Okay. So this is consumption model is only available for specific applications offerings. So it is not available for all the applications and users need to pick up whichever is relevant to you and go with that. Now, what is FEW model? Right. So FEW stands for full user equivalent. Okay, which is a pretty new licensing model that SAP has introduced in 2019. Okay, so after 2018, after the announcement of the new licensing model in 2018, SAP started moving on to the various licensing models. It is keep on revisiting, identifying what new licensing models can be implemented, and then coming up with lots and lots of changes to their existing licensing models, in which FEW licensing model is one. Right. So what happens is basically the FEW model is currently available for single tenant. Okay, so we basically have two different models in the S4 HANA cloud. One is called as a single tenant. The other one is called as a multi-tenant. Okay, so we'll see what comes under multi-tenant, what comes under single tenant and all. Right. And this is a flexible user model. Okay, which can be used for all type of users. So when I say all type of users, you don't have professional, limited professional, employee, all these types of users. What you have is three types of users. One is called as the advanced user or the advanced use, core use, and self-service use. Apart from that, you have a developer user as well, right? So what you can do is you can basically identify what is your exact usage and then accommodate that into your view model. So tomorrow when you want to extend somewhere, so let's say you want to decrease your professional users and move on to your production users, still you can make those changes and use the same view licenses. See, if you look at the table which is there on the right side, so the view model basically uses 0.5 for the developer user. Advanced use is one view, and then core user will be 3 views. That is the amount of views that it uses, units that it uses, and then for the self-service it uses 30 views, which means in case if you have 30 users who comes under professional user category today, then you need 30 views for that, right? And let's say I have 25 functional users today, right? Now what is that I need is basically 5 views, right? And then productivity users who are under self-service, right? So this is actually 15 functional users will be 5 views because it is 3, the measuring unit is 3, sorry for that. And then I have self-service users which are probably 300 productivity users. What is that I need is 10 views. So overall what is that I'm utilizing is 45 views, in my total licensing contract. So these 45 views can be changed from time to time, period to period. I can increase these numbers. So I can decrease my professional users from 30 to 20, and that 10 views, whatever additional views I have, I can use them in my productivity users. So SAP is not going to charge you. So in the old model, what happens in case if you have, let's say, 50 professional users, and then it has identified that you have 100 users who fall into professional, and in case if you have unused, unlimited or unused employee type users also, you cannot utilize them. So you have to pay for additional professional users and then still pay the maintenance charges for the unutilized licenses also. So that is what SAP is changing now, wherein you can shuffle your licenses and ensure that your few licenses or total views are matched with whatever your contract says. So trading between your categories is easy with the few licenses. Now what is that you can use? So in case if you have a multi-tenant S4HANA implementation, as I said, currently it is still SAP is still working on to get this, but hopefully in the next 2 to 3 months, I'm expecting that SAP comes with the same licensing view model for multi-tenant also. So it is only for single tenant what they have the view licensing model now. So what happens now? So this is classified into 3 different areas. One is called as the self-service use, core use, and the advanced use. Advanced use is nothing but your professional or industry specific models, right? So in case if you are using any of the ISU relevant modules, then that comes under the advanced use, right? But the other 2 areas you can see, for example, ATP comes under self-service, delivery management, goods movement, maintenance execution, material requirements and planning, self-service, timesheets, approvals, leave management, warehouse management, all these comes under self-service. Here you can see what comes under the core use, right? So if you have any user who is performing inbound processing, right? or inspection planning or quality management related activities or production control or service order management, all those comes under core uses. Okay, the core use. So based on that, so in case if you identify, let's say 100 users who are performing these activities, then what is that you need to do is you need to go back and then see how many of the views you need under the core use. Okay, right? Guys, please keep on leaving your questions. I'll answer that at the end. Okay. Now, similar way, what we have for a single tenant is, if you look at what is single tenant is wherein S4HANA box is given to you. It is you who would be using the S4HANA completely. No one else is sharing the S4HANA box. It's not a multi-tenant. Now, when you go for a single tenant box, what happens is, apart from this regular what you get in a multi-tenant, you also have various other options under the core use, like sales related, service fulfillment, variant configurations, and all these things comes under the core uses. And your advanced use carries the same kind of modules. So whatever modules that comes under advanced use, SAP will identify those modules and then ensure that, okay, you are basically classified to that particular view. So this includes your system administration tasks as well. In case if you have your basis guys or your security guys, all these guys still come under the advanced use, which are nothing but your professional category of users, right? So these are the various few models what we have, especially on the single tenant and the multi-tenant. Now, when you actually go for the RISE with SAP also, it is the same model what you have. The few model is similar. The only requirement for RISE with SAP is that you have to go with about 40 views, which is the minimum for someone to sign up for the for this particular model. So it is similar. It is same like the cloud offering what SAP is providing. The only difference is that instead of investing on day one, right, what you can do is you can invest in multiple payments. Year on year you can pay SAP on this particular uses. So everything, database, hardware, everything is included with the RISE with SAP. So that still comes under the few licensing model only, right? And then in addition to that, the database licensing, especially those who are going on-prem, especially with the HEC model, they have to also look at the database licensing model. Now with the HANA database, it is completely different, right? So database models, basically you have two different models. One is called as the full use database and the other one is called as the runtime database. So what is the difference? Now, if some customer wants to go with HANA and then want to use the HANA database for multiple applications, want to do a lot of reportings of the HANA database, that is where we use the full use database. The licensing model is full use database, right? So what happens is SAP will basically calculate on the gig usage, how many gigs of data these databases are using, as well as the CPU core. And if it is a runtime database, SAP also provides the Sybase, not only HANA database. So the third-party databases, basically, when you use Oracle, SQL Server, or Sybase, this is basically the license thing that you take along with your SAP installation. So you can use that as a runtime database. So only to run your application, you would be using the runtime databases. So it is basically priced initially with your SAP software. So you don't need to pay anything extra. But if you are going for cloud, which is any of the cloud platform, then it is completely, gig by, in case if you are going for a multi-tenant or a single tenant, it's basically whatever the size of the database that you are utilizing. Based on that size, SAP will also charge you for the licenses. So basically you basically need to understand what is that you are picking up, what model of licensing you are going with, and based on that, SAP will look at what metrics are applicable, and then bill the customers accordingly to that, right? And then we also have something called as digital access, which is also a key. Now, apart from the user licenses, okay, the named user licenses or few license model, what is that SAP looks at is how your SAP systems are reading or writing the data, okay, with the third party applications. So because of the uh, growing network of the applications, now applications are talking to the other applications, which we term it as Facebook of machines, right? It is not that user is talking to the application. Now application can talk to the other application. One good example is your Salesforce. So your Salesforce can read the data, and then your can be connected to the SAP system for specific activities. Okay, so if you have to create a invoice from Salesforce into the SAP system, you can do that. Your dealer portals. So there are lots and lots of integrations that you can do today with your SAP system, including your chatbots and then all the RPA based solutions, all these things, right? So what happens is when you are utilizing third party applications to read data, write data into the SAP, the actual usage what you have, which is in under the named user, usage will be substantially decreased. So that is a great loss to the SAP, as an company. So that is where SAP has come up with the digital access mode, which is the indirect usage mode, wherein okay, they have identified 9 different types of documents on which they basically calculate the usage. Okay, which is basically your sales documents, invoice documents, purchase documents, service and maintenance documents, manufacturing documents, and all. So what happens now is it basically calculates what amount of document postings are happening in your database, in your SAP, through the application or directly to the database. So what it does is basically it uses something called as SAP token to identify whether it is happening from the SAP system or outside SAP system. Let's say there is a document, sales document, which is posted in the system. Okay. So what SAP looks at is it goes and sees if that particular SAP token is created with this document. Okay, sales document. So if the token is created, that means it is created from SAP directly. If the token is not created, okay, while saving the data sales document into the respective tables, then it is triggered from a third party application, and that is how SAP is looking at the indirect usage. Okay, and always the documents will be counted the first time when a new document is created. It creates that particular document, and the subsequent usage is based on the multipliers. So it basically looks at how many times the application is reading the data or writing the data or updating the data, and all these things will be calculated. And specific like deleting documents and all those things are not calculated. So it basically looks at what documents, number of line items in the documents, and the multipliers what you have in the document, right? So if you look at how exactly the report looks like, this is something that I picked up from the SAP document. So something not specific to any customer that I've picked up. So what happens is it basically looks at the users that are posting like WF batch and other service or the communication users, right? So there is a measurement tool which is already available, which SAP has released, and this measurement tool will be implemented or can be implemented by using one of the SAP nodes. So in case if you are still on ECC, you can install this particular node which gets the measurement tool, and in S4HANA we have this particular node. So once it is implemented, what happens is you can execute this rs UVM underscore DAC T code, which starts a report and then gives you a complete count of the documents, including the identifiers. How many document postings have happened on these 9 particular document types? Okay, so it basically, as I said, it looks at the token, uh, which is the SAP passport token, and identify which is sent from SAP and which is sent from non-SAP applications. Okay, which is a built-in feature. Once you implement this SAP node, it will automatically get, and it tells you what is the amount of quantum of postings that have happened from the indirect usage of the digital access from your third-party applications. And this is what SAP looks at and charges you additionally from time to time for the indirect usage, right? So with that, I'm done with today's topic. So if you guys have any specific questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and then raise your question, or you can leave it in your you just leave it in the chat and then I'll be able to answer that, right? So I'll just give a minute for you to drop the questions and then I'll start answering them.
Hi Raghu sir, Vishwanath from Vishwanath.
Yeah, Vishnu.
Yeah, thank you for your wonderful session, sir. Which I have not gone through this level of in licensing mode. Okay, now I wanted to ask you just in my organization, which we have been using the normal type of the licenses, based like when we are creating the dialogue users, we have been using the professional or limited professional or worker. This type of license we have been using right now, but we are planning to move to the role based license.
Okay.
Just okay, based upon the roles which we have been assigned to the users, just okay, based upon their access we have been paying you the license to the SAP. This is what we are looking for.
Okay.
Just but here what we wanted to know is just how we need to calculate, how we need to measure the maintenance transaction code. Like we are creating the roles which we are adding the transaction codes, right? Just how are we going to be measure, how we are going to be measure the transaction code, how it's going to be like,
Yeah, I
okay,
understand
display
your
some of the
question.
users. Yeah,
Okay.
just is there
So
any?
maybe to answer your question, SAP licensing model is never based on what is assigned to the user. Okay. That is
Okay,
the biggest mistake that most of people do. Basically, whatever is assigned to the user. Let's say if I ask you a question like, I have one basis user who has got SAP or SAP new. So do you classify that user as a professional user? Your answer might be yes, because he has got complete access. But as
yes,
per, if you
exactly.
read the SAP contract says that the licensing categorization should be based on what exactly the user is performing in the system, what he is executing in the system, no, and is not based on what is assigned. So what you basically need to do is you need to understand what exactly the user is performing. So there is a 4-level check that we actually do, which standard SAP functionality cannot give. So that is what exactly when someone do a licensing audit, okay, they will be looking at those 4 levels. So they basically look at all the active users, first level. Second level is, basically whatever transaction codes are assigned to the user and what T codes are executed by the user. Okay, and the third level is what level of postings that the users are doing in the system. Okay, so when we understand on these 4 levels, then only you'll be able to classify the user to the right licensing category. So if you are moving on to a role based approach, then it is definitely not a suggestible approach. You have to rethink on that and then come up with some kind of exercise which basically helps you to understand what is the appropriate category for each of these users.
It does mean that before going to assign a license to the users, we need to be sorted out this information as the first thing, right?
Before you submit your report, USMM report to the SAP guys. That is where you need to do this exercise and then update all the categories and submit your licensing law report.
Okay, understood, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your
Right.
information.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the questions. Okay, do you share the presentation? I'm sorry, I cannot share this presentation, but I'll share the video recording of this meeting with you, on the YouTube, probably in the next 1-2 days time. Okay, so how digital access differ from engine based? So digital access is, as I clearly mentioned, digital access is wherein if a third party application is talking to your SAP system, that is what is called as the indirect usage. But engine usage is basically your payroll records. Let's say you have a SAP system, right? Wherein you have 100 users, but you are processing payroll for 5,000 users. Okay. So it doesn't mean that every employee of your organization needs to be an SAP user, right? So what happens, SAP, whenever you are doing these kind of, especially when you have less amount of users and then you utilize, I mean, payroll is one of an example that I'm giving, but the amount of records or the payrolls that it processes, based on that SAP will charge you. So there is a separate measurement engine for the payroll, based on which SAP will pick up and then understand what is your engine usage and will charge based on that. Okay. Lohit, may I know productivity users means? Is it limited professional? Productivity users is basically now it is professional users mostly, and some part of limited professional comes under the productivity access, right? And future is subscription based license. Yes, of course, it is all subscription model. As I said, the few based model completely moves on to a subscription mode. And then what I see in the next 4 to 5 years is SAP is going to end up the perpetual model completely, because by 2027 every customer should move on to the S4HANA, and by that time SAP makes sure that every customer is moving on to a perpetual mode. A subscription mode, not a perpetual mode anymore. Is there charge from third party plus own also? I don't understand your question, but in case if your question is about using third party applications, as there is a charge for that. And Deva Prakash, can you explain again the few model? I think I explained it in clear, wherein you have only three users in that. Based on that, you'll be charged. So I gave you both the multi-tenant and single tenant model. So based on that, you'll be charged for that particular thing. And how do I know which licensing model is best suited? Basically, it's an exercise that we basically need to do when you move on from ECC to S4, or when you are going for a cloud option. That is where you need to do the SAM audit, the licensing audit, identify what level of users you would need, and this is a repetitive activity. So periodically you have to do this activity and ensure that you understand and buy additional few licenses for the locked users and counts under licensing. It depends on the usage. It's not that I can lock all my users today and then say I'm well within the licensing contracts. No. So SAP looks at multiple things. When this user has logged in, what all activities he has performed, all those things, and then based on that, it basically calculates. But there is a specific process that we need to follow to, basically deactivate the user. And if you follow that, then it is fine. That user is not calculated under the licensing thing. What type of licensing applies for SAP PO, PO, and .NET connector? So the licensing model is completely different. That is a middleware. Now SAP has stopped giving license for the SAP PO application, if I'm not wrong. So the interface licensing depends on what kind of interfaces you are using and what kind of data it is flowing. So it is kind of an engine based again, wherein it looks at the data flow from one system to the other system, right? Deleted user counts will also come under licensing model, but we need to understand when the user is deleted, what is that he has done. Okay. System users are also counted. System users are not counted from one's perspective, but then we also look at what kind of activities these system users are performing in the system, uh, and based on that only SAP does the licensing. Right. So I think with that I answered all the questions. So guys, if you have any other questions, you can still leave the questions in the LinkedIn chat, and I'll be able to answer the questions there. And thanks for your time, and hope to see you guys again in the next webinar. Thanks again, and have a great evening. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much, Raghu.
Thank you.